And then you've got San Diego State from a scheduling perspective, what we learned today, which was the lion's share of the 2024 schedule, the Mountain West releasing the conference schedule for 2024 without dates. And what we learned in there is something really, truly unique for San Diego State. The Aztecs are going to host both Oregon State and Washington State in 2024. So of the 6 expected Aztec home games, like think about that. 2 of them are against Oregon State and Washington State, which has to excite a lot of Aztec fans. I think it's really encouraging for San Diego State in terms of ticket sales and season ticket sales. And again, I think the excitement and the energy that's been provided here by Sean Lewis and the work they're doing right now in recruiting these quarterbacks, I think is really good news for San Diego State. But you're talking about Oregon State coming to Snapdragon Stadium September 7th. The UT had reported previously that Texas A&M Commerce was going to be the FCS game, and I think that would be week 1 or week 0, whenever August 31st is. That might be week 1 in 2024. But then you have Oregon State. You've got a road game at Cal. You have a road game at Central Michigan. You have a TBD in terms of date, home game against Washington State. You've got Air Force at home. You've got Hawaii and New Mexico at home. And then the road slate is really challenging. I mean, I told you Cal, I told you Central Michigan. You go to Boise. We know how hard it is traditionally to win there, although San Diego State's done it a couple of times here in the last decade. You go to UNLV. They're coming off a 9-3 regular season. You go to Utah State and Logan, which isn't an easy place to play. And you go to Laramie to take on Wyoming, also not an easy place to play at elevation. So you just look at that schedule, and yeah, you have an FCS opponent in Texas A&M Commerce. And then from there, it's a challenge. I think this past year's schedule was absolutely a challenge. And I think this upcoming year is one of the more challenging schedules probably in recent San Diego State history. And why do I say that? Because you have 3 quote-unquote Power 5 opponents. Yeah, I know Oregon State and Washington State are going through a transition, but Oregon State's coming off a great year. Washington State had a level of success last year in the Pac-12. We'll see what type of change and turnover there is on those rosters, and there will be change and turnover, including at the quarterback position for both of those teams. But you have those 2 teams that are funded like Power 5 programs. You have Cal that is moving to the ACC. You're going to Central Michigan to take on a MAC team. You're going to Boise. You're going to Wyoming. You're going to UNLV, right? Like this is not an easy schedule. Like there's some tough sledding in here. I'm excited about this schedule, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, but it will not be easy. It will not be easy to get to, you just look at this thing on paper and we have no idea what this roster is going to look like, but you say to yourself, man, getting to 6 or 7 wins is not going to be easy. Is it possible? Yeah, I think it is. Absolutely. It's absolutely going to be possible. But again, on paper, 3 Power 5 opponents among your 12 opponents overall, plus road games, like we talked about, Boise State, UNLV, Utah State, and Wyoming. Tricky is the best way to put it, I would say, for San Diego State in 2024. But I'm excited. I'm sure a lot of Aztec fans here are looking forward to Oregon State and Washington State at home in 2024, an opportunity to pick off potentially one of those teams, if not both. But to get them at home, typically you think about that. You're not getting 2 quote-unquote Power 5 teams at home at the Group of 5 level. And that's something San Diego State's getting in 2024 that basically no other Group of 5 program in the country is going to have a better non-conference home slate than Oregon State and Washington State within the same year. A couple more. I love scheduling, so real quick, I wanted to touch on this. He says, we have a deal with Oklahoma starting in 2027. Do you think we'll do something similar with other big-name schools? We used to play Miami in the 90s. I think San Diego State has scheduled incredibly well non-conference in recent years. I really do, with the home-and-home with Pac-12 opponents, playing schools like UCLA, Arizona State, Washington State, Oregon State, Missouri is on future schedules. Oklahoma is on future schedules. I would say this too. Utah obviously has been on previous schedules. They just got them in Carson a couple years ago and beat them, obviously, when they won 12 games. I would say this. Keep your eye on local regional schools wanting to play more non-conference games in the region, because now that you have programs that are in the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, all the additional travel, you wouldn't think a program like UCLA wants to incur additional travel moving forward. Maybe they want to play more games against a program like San Diego State in football and men's basketball, not just UCLA, but you get my point. I think the programs that have left the Pac-12, which is essentially everyone, have incurred a lot more travel across all sports. So could that be impactful for San Diego State? I've asked JD Wicker about that, and he thought the same thing, that's definitely a possibility. But I mean, to be a group of 5 program that's getting, the Missouris and the Oklahomas and the UCLAs in your home stadium, you're not playing one-off games, right? These are not guarantees. Now, the Oklahoma's a 2-for-1, which is somewhat unique to San Diego State in the last like 15, 20 years because they've played so many home and homes. But the opportunity to get Oklahoma at home is too good to pass up, in my opinion. I mean, how cool is that? Oklahoma, currently in the SEC, coming to Snapdragon Stadium later this decade, and Aztecs going to Norman a couple of times. I think that's a pretty unique opportunity, and I think a lot of people agree with that. But I really give JD Wicker, the administration, a ton of credit for the way they've scheduled because I think it's good. I like the challenging schedule. I like what they've done in the non-conference. I like the fact that they get power programs to come to San Diego as well. I think it's good for it's good all around. I really think that. I don't think it's doing them a favor. I think it's actually you got to think about what's best for you, right? Like it's kind of like when you play BYU. You could argue that in playing BYU, well, doesn't BYU need the opponents when they were an independent? Yeah, but BYU creates revenue. Like look at the BYU series in basketball and the excitement that it brings to both Viejas and in Provo at the Marriott Center. Look at the football games, the interest in those games because of the rivalry. So, I mean, you got a chance. I mean, SC is not coming to San Diego because it's just they don't do that. It's like Oregon isn't going to play games. You're not going to get a home and home with SC. You're not going to get a home and home with Oregon, but UCLA has played home and homes with San Diego State. And if that creates revenue and opportunities for San Diego State, then so be it. If it's a win for UCLA as well, great. But if you're creating revenue and opportunities and excitement around your program by playing those programs, I'm not concerned about what has happened and transpired around conference realignment and everything that's played out over the last year. There's so many different tentacles to that story that, you can't just be like, we're not going to play UCLA because they left for the Big Ten. Like there's just so many particulars that go into that. And I don't think you can overly worry about that moving forward. You got to do what's best for your university and your athletic program. And if you got a chance to play UCLA more often at home, I think you take advantage of that. If you have a chance to play Stanford more often at home, I think you take advantage of that. That's the way I look at it. Victor says, can you explain the 2-for-1? Is that the SEC basically saying this is the only way we'll play a group of 5 team? We'd have to look, guys. Oklahoma will play road non-conference games traditionally, especially in state. They'll play Tulsa occasionally on the road. We'd have to look at previous Oklahoma schedules, but it's not atypical for Oklahoma to play a road non-conference game. I think most of them have been in state in the last decade or a neutral site, potentially somewhere like in the Plains, right? Like in the South, wherever Oklahoma is. I've been to Norman once for a basketball game when I was out east. But the way a 2-for-1 technically works, and don't fully quote me on this, but I believe this is accurate. It's basically a home and home and a guarantee. So what that means is there's no money really traded for the game in San Diego and the game in Norman. The first 2 games, Oklahoma agrees to go to San Diego. San Diego State agrees to go to Norman. The third game is essentially a quote-unquote buy game. I think technically. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this contract works. I haven't seen it. I haven't asked fully in detail of JD Wicker exactly how this works, but that additional game becomes revenue, I believe, for San Diego State. Again, don't quote me on it. But for example, if the going rate for a buy game right now, and I'm completely making it up, is $1.3 million. So the first 2 games, there's no money exchanged, essentially. Oklahoma travels, San Diego State travels. That third game, there is revenue associated with it, that guarantee for the school that's traveling, the buy game, the guarantee. San Diego State buys games, right? They buy group of 5 opponents. They buy FCS opponents to get home games. And Power 5 opponents obviously buy games as well. Some do with more regularity than others. But again, I think if you're going to play a 2-for-1 and you're talking about like top 10 caliber all-time programs, it's hard to turn that down. Top 10. Now, again, are you playing a 2-for-1 against UCLA? Maybe not. But are you playing a 2-for-1 against Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan? Because you're getting Michigan in your building. You're getting Texas in your building. Like that's hard to turn down. Like there's not a lot of group of 5 programs, Victor, to your point, that are getting Oklahoma in their building. Maybe that's like, again, a Tulsa can do it because they're in the state. And I know Oklahoma has done that previously. The reason being that they don't think that they need to do it, that they're overly concerned with putting together their schedule, which is has worked out beautifully historically for SC and Oregon. They don't take on the risk, quote unquote, of playing non-conference road games, especially SC. They play every other year at Notre Dame. So they're not going to take on the additional risk. They'd rather buy games. So SC and Oregon have the budget to buy games. So Oregon traditionally in the Pac-12, if they play 9 conference games and 3 out-of-conference games, those 3 out-of-conference games are strategically put together. They might have home and home with Ohio State. The other 2, they're buying. They're never going to go to a group of 5 team on the road. Oregon hasn't done it in forever. SC is the exact same way. SC just will not play a group of 5 road game. Who knows the last time they played a group of 5 road game. They'll buy games. They'll get San Jose State at home. They'll get Nevada at home. I'm sure they'd love to buy San Diego State, but San Diego State doesn't operate that way. San Diego State has been able to get home and homes with really good programs, and that's the way they operate, and it's been successful. These programs, by the way, want to come to San Diego and recruit Southern California, so they don't need to settle in that regard, and it's worked out really well. Again, can you play every program in the country? No. You're not going to get a home and home with Penn State, but you can get home and homes with BYU and Stanford and UCLA and Arizona State and Washington State and Oregon State. So I think it's worked out. Yeah, Missouri's not 2 for 1. Missouri, and I want to say, what's future schedules look like on Missouri? Are there 4 games or 6? I think there's at least 4 games in future schedules between San Diego State and Missouri, and they're even. So there's no bye. It's 2 games in San Diego, 2 games in Missouri. I love scheduling talk. I could talk scheduling all day, to be honest. Yeah, I think Washington's the same way. Thank you, Brian. Only Pac-12 schools that refuse to do a home and home. That's why they're the only Pac-12 teams we haven't played the past decade plus. That's exactly right. There was a chance San Diego State was going to play Washington during the pandemic year, but they ended up playing Colorado that year. So that would have been a complete one-off because of the pandemic on very short notice. But Brian has it right. That's exactly right.